Okay, John, the video's on. Over to you.
Great. Okay, well, welcome to this, come on, what number it is now, maybe our third or fourth eLN webinar. This one's on brain-friendly e-learning. My name is John Curran. I'm a director at the eLN and was chair for 2 years. And I call myself these days a learning architect. So I'm mainly involved with digital and online learning, but I also deliver courses in the classroom, paradoxically on e-learning. So I believe anybody who's involved in L&D these days needs to be able to deliver learning interventions on all available channels, face-to-face or online. So I'll just there. So this is a slide I often use to start my presentations, and sadly, this is how I think a lot of my clients still think what learning looks like. So there's the subject matter expert putting all the reams and reams of text into the LMS. The poor little instructional designer is churning it all out, and every single word of text is going into the learner's heads, isn't it? In practice, of course, this doesn't happen. It's probably a case of one in one ear and out the other. This was drawn by a French cartoonist back in 1899, and here's how he envisaged learning in the year 2000. He wasn't too far wrong. The only thing he didn't foresee was Wi-Fi. So I'm going to start today by asking, I'm assuming a lot of you are involved in digital learning and online learning. I'm sure many of you will be learning designers involved in putting learning together online. So I just want to ask quickly, what theories, models or frameworks guide your current learning designs? So you'd like to type some buzzwords into the chat window, and I'll run through some of them once you've done that. 70-20-10, brilliant. Okay, good. That's a new one. Mayer, good. Yes, Mayer's multimedia principles. Conversation theory. Oh no, that's a new one for me. Bloom, yes, Bloom, good. Another 70-20-10. Design thinking, a bit more up to date. Cognitive theory. Actually, the next webinar is on cognitive load theory. Bloom again. Good. Okay, so that's. So some of these things in the years we use over and over again. Nobody mentioned ADDIE. I don't like ADDIE at all. I don't think ADDIE is a learning design framework at all. I think it's just a software development process. So skipping on, so nobody mentioned learning styles. So still a lot of people use learning styles to guide what they do in online learning. And there's lots of different learning styles models. You notice on some of these slides there are some URLs at the bottom of the slide. So at the end of this webinar, you'll have a copy of the slides, and you'll be able to check out those links. Kolb, so Kolb's experiential learning cycle is quite popular, something I use a little myself with clients. Honey and Mumford took Kolb stuff and sort of made it a bit more complicated and added the different sort of their own version of learning styles. Gagny, no, I think I meant to mention Gagny. So Gagny's 9 events instruction, one thing I have found useful in the past. Bloom's have already been mentioned, so that's one thing that's also quite useful, especially when it comes to thinking about how you're going to assess people. Nobody mentioned Dale's cone of experience, also quite a useful approach. The numbers are been added later by somebody else and are often discredited. And there are a whole host of other learning theories, especially if you look in education. There's a whole stack of different theorists who've thought about how people learn, how you can help people learn better. So we've been using these for lots and lots of years. Many of these theories are quite old. So recently we've learned a lot more about how the brain works, and so I've been, as a learning designer, I think, well, if we know more about how the brain works, then to what extent can we use this knowledge of our brain to inform our learning designs? So I've been very interested recently in what's going on in neuroscience. So I've got a separate little brain here. This is my sort of standby brain. It's a nice little. So it's this. I use this to when I do my face-to-face events. I pass around the room so you can all have a look at my spare brain. If I get cognitively overloaded, then I can swap my existing brain for this one here. So I'm going to look first of all at what I call the medical brain. So the brain is divided into 3 core parts. The main part is the cerebrum. Probably about 75-80% of your brain is this outer gray matter. That's responsible for all the higher thinking functions. We'll look at those shortly. Behind it, in this blue area here, there's a thing called the cerebellum. Now that's responsible for other things like balance, some lower thinking skills. Also, we think language. And then finally, in the middle, in this little pink thing here, is what we call the brain stem. And that's responsible for things like breathing, some of those autonomic functions that we do without even thinking about. You know, running your heart, just making your body work. So that's sort of the basic three parts of the brain from a medical point of view. So what we tend to do is divide the cerebrum into a number of different parts called lobes. So just like I think you've probably come across this sort of diagram before. Can anybody remember any of the lobes that our brain is divided into? Very good, yes, frontal, temporal. Good. So these are the different lobes. So we've got the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. And if you notice, the brain has a line down the middle. So actually, we actually have a left and a right brain. So more on that later. So sometimes you may hear people talking about the evolutionary brain. So it's believed that the first part of our brain that developed was the reptilian brain, and that's basically the brain stem. And then the next along from that came the limbic brain, which is primarily a cerebellum, and finally came the cerebrum, the thinking cognitive brain. So you may sometimes see mentions of reptilian and limbic brains. So looking at the cognitive brain, which is probably what most of this presentation is about. So this is the bit of the brain that does all the higher thinking skills. Now, although the brain is divided up into those various lobes, by studying the brain, mainly by studying people who've got brain injury, we've worked out that different parts of the brain do different things. So this is a sort of very rough idea of what those different pieces do. But actually, in practice, it isn't as easy to divide the brain into these different colors and to assign certain functions like this. The more and more we learn about the brain, the more we actually recognize that all the brains working together in order to help us think, and specifically to help us learn. Sometimes you'll hear a bit about left and right brain, the sort of I call that the creative or populist brain. So there is a left and right part to our brain, and the left and right is from your perspective. So it's your left and your right. So the left brain is often associated with numbers and analysis and logic, and the right brain is associated with creativity, that sort of thing, artistic, creative functions. So I'd just like to do a little exercise. I want you to just very quickly clasp your hands in front of you. Done that? So when you've done that, if your left thumb is on top, that means your right brain dominant. If your right thumb is on top, that means your left brain dominant. Actually, whenever I do this, I end up being right brain dominant. Hopefully that's an indication of some of the creative approach I apply to my learning design. Also, we sometimes have this analogy of a brain like a computer. And there's a lot of work been done recently to think about it. The computer is a sort of analogy for the brain, but actually the more and more we understand what's happening in the brain, probably the less we think, the less like the brain we think the computer is. It's not really like a computer. It actually works in a very different way. There's actually quite a lot of discussion in the neuroscience world at the moment, whether you can download your brain and freeze it. There's a lot of research going where you can freeze your brain and then reawaken it in 50 or 100 years time. Can you live again like you are now? And will you still know the same stuff? So there's a big debate in neuroscience at the moment. Probably most people think you probably can't do that. So make the best use of your brain while you can. So what's all this got to do with learning design? Well, recently I've been reading a lot of books about learning and neuroscience. So these are some books I've read, and one of the ones I particularly liked was one by Daniel T. Willingham. And another book I really enjoyed too was Make It Stick, The Science of Successful Learning. But also some of these other books are also really useful. I've read most of these. all in great detail, but most of them in recent detail. So I definitely recommend certainly Daniel T. Willingham book, and also the Science is Successful by Make It Stick. So what I'm going to cover in the next few slides is some of the key points from particularly Daniel Williams' book, and also the Make It Stick book. So we're going to cover 5 really useful things from cognitive science. 5 things. So they'll be on your hand, okay? So one digit for each thing. So first of all, we avoid thinking if possible. So we're naturally very curious, but if possible, we'll avoid thinking. So we'll drive the same route to work. We'll do the job the way we've always done it. So some ways it's to do with our evolution. So we've always done things in that way. So our brain sort of forces us to do that way. So actually, it's quite hard for us to do something different. To force somebody to change the way they do something, or even think about something, is quite tricky. Certainly, if you think about politics, people's ideas about things are very hard to change. So I want to quickly just look at, well, in that case, how does thinking work? How do we actually, how does the brain work when we need to think about something? So we have, first of all, we have our sensory memory. So you're hearing me, you may be seeing me on video, so maybe hearing other things outside the room with certain distractions. So we're taking in all those sensory things, but actually, all that ever goes into working memories is what we pay attention to. So hopefully you're paying attention to what I'm saying. So some of that is now going into working memory. But the working memory is very limited. It can only hold about sort of 20 seconds worth of thought. So if you really want to remember something and encode it, what we call encode it, we have to put it into long-term memory. Otherwise, it just falls out again. So probably the analogy I like to use is that of a bucket. So a bucket with lots of holes in it. So we're constantly pouring information into our brain, and most of it, like a leaky bucket, is flying out again. So if we really want to put stuff into long-term memory, we need to encode it somehow. And the final point here is rehearsal. So rehearsal is something you do in order to try and put things into long-term memory. So a good example is, say somebody gave you a phone number, you'd repeat it over and over again in your head until you'd actually dialed the number, and then it'd be lost. So rehearsal is a way of sort of trying to remember it for a slightly longer period, but rehearsal generally doesn't mean it goes into long-term memory. So long-term memory is very limited. So I could ask you to solve this puzzle. This is the Tower of Hanoi. So could you solve this puzzle using your short-term memory? You could make a start of this, but it would be quite challenging to make all those moves and hold all those moves in your head. Would be very challenging. It's a bit like playing chess. It's recognized that master chess players are able to store up to about 20 moves in their head store 20 moves ahead of time, which makes them very good at playing chess. Computers, of course, can do that even more successfully. So that's something that's very hard to do in your working memory. Just in case, if you are interested, so there's the solution for 5 disks. I'm sure you won't remember that, but it's there in case you need it. Here's another little challenge. So can you carry out this computation in working memory? The way I do it, I multiply the 10 by 7, get 70. 8 by 7 is 56. Add the two together, and I get 126. So most of us can probably do that in short-term memory. Actually, the 7, 8, 56, that comes from long-term memory. Way back when I learned my multiplication tables. We'll look a bit more at long-term memory shortly. So, as learning designers, one of our primary goals is to encourage people to think. So if people don't think, then none of that encoding will go on. We can just simply pour information into their heads, and it'll be in one ear and out the other, a bit like that slide I showed at the start. So it's really important to kind of people to encode stuff, to remember stuff in long-term memory, that they actually think about it. So think to learn. So the second thing is really important, is knowing stuff is key. So really knowing stuff already is important for learning. So there's a sort of a big thing at the moment with digital learning, online learning, is the idea of performance support, or what I call just-in-time learning. You can look things up when you need them. Often go to Google and look something up, and that is helpful. I mean, that can give you an answer to something, but that's not the same as learning. So you can't look everything up. In order to learn effectively, you need to have stored things in long-term memory. So if you want to become a master of something, it's really critical that you know a lot of stuff. And I call this the learning paradox. So basically, the more you know, the more you learn, the better you can learn. And it's so if you look at this, it's interesting to look at what is long-term memory doing. So think about back to our earlier diagram about the way short-term and long-term memory work. We have our sensory inputs, and then we have this little very tiny short-term working memory. So we can put inputs into the short-term memory, and generally the brain just wants to flush it out again. So anything I can use very quickly, fine, but otherwise I'm going to flush it out again. So actually what we want to do is try and get that into long-term memory. Long-term memory is deep and complex. So it's quite hard to push that stuff into long-term memory. I'm sort of minded, one of my favorite characters, my son watched a lot of The Simpsons, and one of my favorite quotes from Homer was, every time I learn something new, it pushes some old stuff out of my brain. So his idea was, well, if I learn something new, something old gets kicked out. So I don't know if anybody here agrees with that theory. I'll probably side with Leonardo. So his belief was learning never exhausts the mind. So his understanding was the more you learn, the more different things you learn. In fact, Leonardo was famous for learning science, arts, philosophy, and combining all those together, which made him a better learner across all disciplines. Something which I think is a strong message for us all these days. So long-term memory works in quite different ways. So if I asked you to remember this is my online banking password. If I asked you to remember this string of characters in a minute, you probably struggle. But if I arrange them in that way, a bit easier. There's a couple of things I recognize there: ICI, ANC. But arrange them that way, and now they're even more memorable. So one of the things long-term memory does, it looks for patterns. If it recognizes patterns, identifies things it already knows, then it's able to then add those to long-term memory much more effectively. So I was at the Learning Technology Summer Forum, and Dr. Etienne Dror talked about pilots and how they learn to identify aircraft when they're flying in the air, whether they're friend or foe. And they worked out by studying a lot of fighter pilots that they have a sort of really very highly sensitive pattern matching system. So they didn't specifically learn one aircraft and memorize it. What they did was they identified various aspects of the aircraft, the sort of wing, the engine, the fuselage, and the tail, and then they use that to pattern match in their head, which made them much more effective at identifying different types of aircraft, and therefore associating whether the aircraft was whether they should attack it or stay away from it or whatever. And the other thing we've discovered recently is that reading ability matters a lot what you know already matters a lot to your reading ability. So we've identified that weak readers, if they have a lot of knowledge, learn a lot better than strong readers with weak knowledge. And in fact, recently there's been a lot more evidence why reading is really important for learning. Probably as learning designers, we're told that reading doesn't work anymore, but actually there's now sort of people are rethinking about actually to what extent is reading really important in helping people learn. So a couple of books there about reading and learning, and how reading is a core part of learning. So as learning designers, how often do we really find out what learners already know? A lot of my clients say to me, oh, just teach them this. And very rarely do they give us a real opportunity to identify what learners already know. So for me, it's really, really important to try and identify what they already know. Because only when we identify what they know, can we then build upon that? Can we work on strategies to improve what goes into their long-term memories? So knowing stuff already is key. So number 3, which I think is a really useful one. So memory is the residue of thought. So you remember what you think about, not what you're told about. So if I asked you now, what are you thinking about? Are you all thinking about the same thing? Some of you are thinking about what I'm saying. Some of you are thinking about how it relates to something you're doing at work. Other people are thinking about what they're going to do on the way home. So whatever you're thinking about, it's really, really critical to what you remember. So lunch, that's it, lunch. So yes, okay, lunch. Oh dear, maybe I should speed up. Yeah, so really important to get learners to think about something, because then if they think about it, then that's actually what you remember, not what you. So they don't remember what we tell them. They remember what they think about. So what our learning intervention has to do is get them to think about something. So I'm going to ask you to do a little thinking exercise here. So what I want you to do, this is an example of a thinking exercise I run when I run this face-to-face. So what I want you to do is to draw a bike from memory. Okay, make it as accurate as you can, include all the key working parts, and maybe even a saddle. A lot of people tend to forget that. So you've all probably ridden a bike, and if you haven't ridden one, you've certainly seen lots and lots. I'm sure you've all maybe seen a bike on the way into work today. So I'd like you to just take a minute. I'd like you to draw a bike. Keep it simple, and then I'll share a number of different bikes drawn by some others. So this exercise is to get you to think. So you all think you know what a bike looks like. Most of you probably, at least half of you must ride a bike. I'm doing a big cycle ride at the weekend over Dartmoor, 70 miles. So I probably won't remember the bike, but I will remember the 70 miles. It's pity we can't share some of your drawings here. It's quite a nice set when we do this face-to-face. It's quite a nice session to see what people have drawn. Okay. Okay. Yeah, oh yes. Okay, Kevin. Sounds good. So you should see this monstrosity. Okay. Yes, it's quite interesting to see what people have done. So here we go. So I'm going to reveal some bikes. Okay. So stand by. So Kevin, does your bike look like this? So this is drawn by Carla. So it's not too bad. It's got 2 wheels, it's got handlebars, and it's got a saddle. But what on earth are those 2 chains on each pedal? So clearly, how those. Oh, there's a little line. Maybe that's going to join the pedals to the chain to the wheel. One more. This is Jane, from Jane, age 7. So here, well, now she's got a chain. So the chain connects. It looks like the front wheel and the back wheel. But isn't quite connected to the pedals. It looks to me like the pedals are connected to the saddle. That's an interesting concept. Another one here. Once again, we've got 2 wheels, we've got the handlebars, and I think the thing in the middle is a saddle. But there's no chain, and I think those 2 things dropping down are also pedals. And finally, probably the most accurate one of the bunch. So here we have the normal bike frame with the handlebars, the saddle, and the pedals and the chain. So thinking about that bike and getting you to draw it is something that you've probably seen bikes every day, but actually when it comes to actually drawing a bike, it's surprisingly how poor people are at recalling that what their vision of a bike. So often what people often draw is what they think is a bike, not what a bike looks like. So thinking like exercises like this are really useful to get people to to really sort of check that what's in their long-term memory, and how you can then teach them new stuff. Another very good thing to do with prior knowledge is stories. So stories provide a great framework for thinking. Not necessarily because it's just a story and may have an emotional thing to it, but good stories leave gaps. So when you tell somebody a story, they are already thinking about what's happening, what's going to happen next. So what they do is they fill in the gaps. And that's a really good approach to use for learning as well as for storytelling. There's nothing so boring as a story where they tell you absolutely everything. A lot of stories, they leave things out, and they leave you as the reader or the learner to infill the gaps, and that's a great approach to use in learning. Another really important thing to do to get people to think about things, and hopefully some of you may be doing this now. So who here is actually writing notes? So either writing notes on a piece of paper on a desk, or typing into their iPad. So anybody who's making notes, that's really important, because you're unlikely to be writing down what I'm saying. What you're doing is you're putting some things into short-term memory, running them through your long-term memory, and writing down the result of that connection. So notes are effectively connections. So writing notes, making notes is a very, very strong way to help you think about stuff. And don't forget, as we're saying, thinking about stuff helps you remember stuff, and remembering is about learning. This, for example, is I like to do sketchnoting now. If you haven't done it before, check out the books on sketchnoting or mind mapping. That's also another technique. And I find sketchnoting very, very good for sort of helping me think about things that I'm being presented with. So new information I'm being presented with, I use sketchnoting to try and sort of map it to what I already know. So often I'm not writing down what they're saying, I'm writing down other things that pop into my head that I've made a connection with. So this is actually my sketch note from ETL Draws LT Summer Forum session. I try and stick to one A4 page. As you can see here, I was pretty close to running out of space. Good. So learners are much more likely to remember something that they've actually thought about. So hopefully you've had a good think about bikes this morning. So if nothing else, the next time you see a bike, you think, oh, actually, yes, the pedals do connect to the rear wheel that way. So memory is the residue of thought. So number 4, so only 2 to go. So number 4, it's easier to learn new things if we can relate them to things we already know. So whenever something new is presented to us, we relate it to, in the context of things we already, what does that look like? Do I already know some of this? Is there something similar to what I know? So it's a bit like, I like the idea of the brain is one great big jigsaw puzzle, and where over our lifetime we're filling in pieces. I mean, this is an unlimited jigsaw puzzle. So we're gradually filling in pieces as we go through our lives. So the more you know, the more there is of the puzzle, the more places there are to fit extra pieces in. So it's continually growing. So when we so going back to what I said earlier, our learners already know lots of stuff. In fact, I'm just astounded how often clients say to me, we need to teach them this stuff. And I said, well, probably they know half this stuff already, or even more. I said, well, don't bother with that. Just tell them the stuff. But actually, most of us have lots of prior knowledge. Here today, lots of you have probably done some research on cognitive neuroscience, on brain friendly, on some of those things. So actually, you already know a lot of stuff. So what I'm talking about, some of you already know. Some of it might be new. So you'll be constantly sort of fitting it into what you already know. So I'm presenting some new knowledge represented by that circle, and depending on what your existing knowledge is, the overlap is the learning. So that's what. So you won't go away with everything I've talked about today, but you will go away with that bit that you've connected into your long-term memory. But if you already know more stuff, so if you if you already know a load of stuff about cognitive neuroscience, then actually there's more stuff that you'll probably learn. So knowing a lot already means that actually there's more likely to be more you're going to be able to put in long-term memory. So once again, that's this idea of the paradox of learning. The more you know, the more you're able to learn. I think a lot of people do liken the brain to a sort of bit like your body. The more you exercise it and challenge it and do things with it, the more it's likely to perform for you. I know there's lots of these brain training games people do, especially as people get older. So yeah, for me, the more you learn, the better you are able to learn. So there's lots of techniques we can use to tap into prior knowledge, and hopefully most of these, as learning designers, you're going to recognize. So we can use examples. So is there something like this you've seen before? I can use analogies, so we can compare things with something else that they might know about. We can do scenarios that they might recognize in the workplace or whatever. We can tell them stories, as we mentioned earlier. Or one of my favorite things is scaffolds. Is there a simplified view of this that our learners can get on board for the start? So examples are really simple to do. So okay, we can tell them stuff about anything, but actually show me some examples. Give me an example. And examples will really help embed things in long-term memory. Hopefully examples that they recognize. So if they don't recognize those examples, it's a bit harder to do. When I'm writing scenarios or doing these sort of things for clients, it's really important that they are realistic. So another thing I really like is an analogy. So probably a favorite analogy is the iceberg. So obviously analogies only work if we know how an iceberg works. So it's no good using an iceberg analogy if people don't know that the bit of the iceberg you see is only a very small portion of the iceberg. But once they know that analogy can work well for getting things across to learners. And often when you do something like this, they'll often go away afterwards, having done this like an hour session, and all they'll remember is the analogy. But that's actually quite important, because at least that's a hook. That's sort of memory hook for them. And then from that, then maybe they'll dive deeper, do more research, or remember some of the other things that they've learned. Scenarios, very popular. So of course in e-learning we do tons of these things. So if they're realistic, if they're challenging, that once again they can be really good technique for tapping in to what people already know. In fact, I'm a big believer in saying, right, let's just do a scenario, and then based on how you do, we'll then fill in what else you need to learn. So probably you know a lot of this already. You either know it, half know it, or you can have a good guess at it. So scenarios are a really good place to start to really uncover what people already know and what they don't know. And other thing is stories. So stories are really important. So stories are also a great way to tap into what people know. So most Hollywood movies follow a sort of story arc. They start with setting up the characters, the problem, then they have to overcome the problem, and then there's some sort of successful ending. So people have a sort of understanding of how a story works. So stories, and then you can walk them through the story and they can fill in the gaps. So stories are a very powerful tool for like tapping in to what people already know. And finally, scaffold. So it's a big fan of scaffold. So for example, on my courses I use Kolb. You're learning theorists, and this is his theory, but I use it just to explore how people learn. And the Kolb cycle of learning is a really useful scaffold. It's not actually how learning works, but when you're just trying to understand how to design something for learning, it's a really useful scaffold. So great teachers help bridge the gap between what is understood and what is new. So I think if you look back to maybe your time in school or college, all the best teachers really made that strong connection between what you know and what they're trying to teach you. My maths teacher was amazing at doing that. My physics teacher was rubbish. So my maths teacher used really good examples and helped me learn more effectively. So need to relate, for the fourth thing, relate to what is already known. And the final thing, something you've probably come across, it's been quite popular recently, whether or not you've been looking at cognitive neuroscience, is proficiency requires practice. So to make learning stick, we need to practice retrieval. So if you remember back to that first diagram, a little diagram of how the memory works, the short-term and long-term memory, there was a little thing coming back from long-term memory to short-term, and that's retrieval. So if you keep practicing, so if we encode successfully, we have to practice retrieving it in order to really make that learning loop work effectively. You've probably come across this chap, Ebbinghaus. So actually, as human beings, we're really brilliant at forgetting. Once again, probably back to evolution. So you know, if there's too much information, we just focus on what we think is really important to us at this moment in time. Maybe your lunch. So the rest of it, we sort of, well, do I really need it? Do I really need it? I'm always saying this to clients, you know, learners will take shortcuts. They are going through everything you're trying to tell them, saying, is this relevant to me? Do I need to encode it? Do I need to write it down? Do I need to remember it? Or can I just get rid of it? And you know, getting rid of things is really useful, but that means I've got less to actually remember. So Ebbinghaus is quoted often for about how people forget things. Actually, he did it based on a really he did it his research based on himself, and he tried to remember nonsense syllables, syllables such as wid and zoff. So and he just often he tried to learn them over a period of time to see how many of those he remembered and how many he forgot. So probably it's not really a valid test of true learning, but it's often quoted these days. But I think probably most of us would agree that practice makes perfect, and there's lots of quotes out there on why why people think practice is important. So I quite like that one in the bottom right hand corner. Practice is the best of all instructors. And certainly in eLearning, and when we're designing eLearning, one of the things we're trying to do is get people to practice things straight away. More doing, less telling is really key in all sorts of learning. And there's actually, I don't know if you know Donald Clark. He's a bit of a sort of a disruptor. He used to build eLearning, now does his own blog and stuff. There's a link down there, a really good article about Booz Allen. They did some research on space practice as against conventional learning approaches. And surprise, surprise, they discovered it was really effective. Now, it depends on what you're learning. So clearly, some of the higher, more complicated things, it's space practice is tricky. But it is never necessarily a very good approach to making sure people know stuff. In fact, what they did in Booz Allen was it was about identifying information security lapses in emails and things. So over a period of time, they just kept sending these sort of practice emails, and then if they did the wrong thing, they got some feedback. Really quite interesting study. We did similar things a while back. We did some work with the NHS in Wales, and we built pretty much all the modules based on this idea of I don't call it space practice then, but about really practicing until they really knew pretty much every case example. And probably the best example I would say of sort of space practice at the moment that you can all access is Duolingo. So if you're going abroad this year and you need to learn a language, I definitely recommend Duolingo. I'm going to Russia. I've got it on my phone. That's a hard language because it uses the wrong alphabet. But Duolingo uses this idea of space practice. And basically, the more you practice, the better you get, and the harder it makes the examples. And there's a great blog post actually by Sam Burrows. Is a fellow learning designer based in the southwest as well, he's out of Bristol, and he's done a great blog post on Duolingo, and it's how you can adopt its techniques as a learning the designer. So finally, space practice. So think to learn, knowing stuff already is key. Memory is the residue of thought. Relate to what is already known. So, and I like to simplify these as evoke curiosity. Where are they now, the learners? What do they know already? Encourage thinking. What can I do to make them think about this stuff? Pattern match. So is there anything that, any way we can match this to what they already know? Is it similar to what they already know? Can we have an analogy? Can we create a scaffold? Is there something we can do to sort of get them to, oh, I've seen that before. That's like this. And that makes it much more, makes it much easier for them to learn and to engage with. It also helps them think about it more effectively. And finally, practice. So my final little exercise for you is a little sort of learning design exercise, I guess. So imagine you want to teach your child to play chess. Okay, if you've got no children, imagine that it's your niece or nephew or whatever, your brother and sister if you're young enough. Imagine you want to teach your child how to play chess. Now, chess is quite a complex game. So which of those 5 things might you use to guide your learning design? So can you just type into the chat window some creative things you could do to help a child learn chess, which is after all quite a complex game. I certainly wouldn't want to sit down and read them the 4-inch thick chess rulebook. So do please type in some ideas you could use to teach your child chess. Spaced practice, yes. How would you do that? Harry Potter, that's a good idea. Link to Harry Potter, great idea. Pictures of pieces, matches to moves, good. Connect to checkers, excellent. Yes, checkers, or if you're in the UK, drafts. So it uses the same board, but has a simpler move system, simpler pieces. Stories to pieces, yes. Yeah, make a story out of it, great idea. Excellent, good. I think I think all those ideas. So what you're going to do is by doing some of these things, you're going to get the child to think about it. So it's no longer some abstract black and white board with these boring piece things. It's actually something that's going to come alive to them. They're going to think about it. They're going to maybe compare what they already know. If they've already played checkers or drafts, then clearly you can build on that. If they haven't, then you don't have that. Yes, I mean, act out the moves, excellent. So some of those I put in. So act out the moves. So I said, yeah, teach the basic moves on paving slabs in the playground. So I think that's great. So there's also, if you're into the learning styles, there's a great kinesthetic thing for doing that. So walking the moves that the bishop makes or the knight makes. Yeah, I like the Harry Potter idea too. So I've said give superpowers, give each piece a backstory, give them unique names. That's going to just bring the whole thing alive. Compare with draft and checkers, somebody mentioned as well. So you could do scaffolding, so you could start with fewer pieces, limit the moves, limit the board space, have a simpler goal. So because chess, there's a lot of moves to get to the end. So maybe you could simplify it to start out with. And also you could maybe set the game up so that it's near the end. So there's often a long way before they get to the end of the game for a checkmate. So maybe you could set the board up very close to the end and get them to play those last few moves. So it's really good to begin with the end in mind. So once they see the end, then they can work back towards the start. Good. Okay, I see some excellent creative thinking there. That really pleases me. Good. So that's the end of my my session on brain-friendly e-learning. Now, I'm not a cognitive neuroscientist. I'm a learning designer. I've been using these theories we mentioned at the start for years to guide some of what I do. I don't think any one theory is above any other. I just use those to guide what I do, combined, of course, with experience and a bit of intuition as well. But I think some of the stuff that's coming out of cognitive neuroscience is really interesting. Some of it backs up a lot of what the learning theorists say. And I think it's certainly a rich area for us as learning designers to explore. Certainly in education, that there's a lot of focus on brain-friendly approaches, and certainly. I don't know if you know Stella Collins, who's written a great one of the books I recommended on neuroscience for learning. She runs a sessions called Brain Friendly Learning, and I know she does a lot of that stuff in her sessions. In fact, she's coming to our next event. She's speaking at our next event in Manchester. So I'm not a cognitive neuroscientist, but I think what's coming out of cognitive neuroscience is really going to inform and support what we do as learning designers over the next few years. Good. So any specific questions?
Hi, John. It's Joan here. We have had one participant asking if you're able to share your slides with the
Yes. So what we're going to share all the slides. So you get all the slides, and also with those slides you'll have all those URLs, those links that are on the various slides as well.
Thank you. If you do have a question for John, just write it in.
Alan, yes, that sugar-coated pill. That would be, yes, I like that idea. That would be good, but that would put us all out of a job, wouldn't it? Then the pharma companies would take over, and us learning designers would be left without a job. Yes, Matthew, I did teach myself sketch note taking. Well, as I taught myself, I just practiced it. I just did it. I didn't. I read most of the book, and then just practiced it. So, so when you focus on just-in-time learning, what are your thoughts on creating content? Now, I'm a big fan of creating content. So I do talk about just-in-time learning, but it's not what I call deep learning. But certainly, the role of creator is really important, and I think the first place to start these days is to create rather than create. So, as a teacher, I think probably one of your primary roles is to maybe find the best things out there and then connect them up for other people. So in some ways, that's what I've done today. So I've just read some books on cognitive neuroscience, and I'm trying to simplify that for my own practice and put that simplification into my presentation today. Brain is now full. I think that's unlikely, Alan. I suspect that there is plenty of extra space in your brain. Yeah, microlearning. Yeah, I mean, clearly there's a trend to make things shorter and smaller. Yeah, you can learn from anything. You can read a 4,000-page book, or you can just read a quick 4-paragraph blog and learn something. So all the things I've talked about actually apply. So microlearning, yeah, it will work, but it has to make people think about something. So just making things shorter doesn't make them any more effective, in my view. And I just wanted to sort of keep on asking questions, but I also wanted to share our upcoming events in the eLN. So we have next week in Manchester. I don't know if anybody's in the Manchester area. We still have some places left on our workshop in Manchester on the 7th of July. Our next webinar is very much linked to this topic, actually, cognitive overload. That's on Thursday, 27th of July, online again, same time, same place. And then the next one coming up is in Glasgow in September, which is sort of a bit of a more cool show your work on conference. So people are going to come along and show what they've done, discuss how they make things better. So it's a much more sort of informal event. It's taking place at Glasgow Clyde College. There's a really amazing interactive learning centre with basically a curved wall of screens. So yeah, it's a really cool new space. So if you're based in Glasgow or in the Glasgow area in September, I definitely recommend that event. How much practice is optimal for learning to be retained? That's the $64,000 question. I mean, people talk about 10,000 hours to make you a master. So I think the more you practice, the better you get. And clearly, as you practice, you can overcome harder things. So as you practice, you'll come across examples which are harder to solve. I mean, all of us in our day-to-day lives come across situations that are similar to ones we've seen before, but have something extra in them. And it's only by working those out, by solving those problems, do we learn effectively. So I think there's no end to practice. And I think you talk to Andy Murray or Usain Bolt, they even to this day they will still practice. creating a learning culture in a company where it isn't a priority. Oh, that's a big uphill struggle. Yeah, I mean, for me, any company that's going to be around in 20 years' time needs to have a learning culture. So it's, I mean, we talked years ago about the learning organization. I very rarely see proper learning organizations, but certainly a learning culture is critical, I think, to a company's future success. So something like Google or Apple, I've never worked there, I've never been into there, but I imagine they have a strong learning culture. Learning styles. Well, learning styles, yeah. I mean, I mean, I'm not a believer in people have a specific learning style. But generally when I put learning together, design learning, I like to mix it up. So a bit of auditory, a bit of visual, a bit of kinesthetic if you can, mix it up. People generally, you can't go wrong if you mix it up a bit. But I'm not a believer in we have one. Possibly maybe people have a preferred style, but I certainly wouldn't design learning with that in mind. For me, I just mix things up. AI, well, that's a whole new ball game. Yes, I mean, it's a topic of interest of mine, actually, artificial intelligence. I think that's going to be, machine learning and AI is going to be really, really important over the next 10 years. I've tweeted, I think, which jobs are going to be threatened in the next few years or so. And as AI gets better, I think that is going to be a challenge to us all. Yeah, so I think AI will both be a threat, but also an aid. So I think when we're, for example, when we're searching for things on the web, we're still waiting for the semantic web. So when I type something into Google, often you get completely erroneous results, and not just because of Google's business model, because it doesn't really understand the context in which you're searching. So I think AI will definitely help that. So you'll be able to almost have a discussion with Google to find the sort of stuff you need. Yeah, so I definitely recommend if you're keen on this topic, then do come along to our cognitive overload one at the end of July. I'll be where you are then. I'll be a participant thinking about my lunch. Oops, I mean, I'll probably be sketchnoting, actually.
John, thank you very much. It's Joan here.
Yep, hi, Joan.
Sorry for the frivolous joke about lunch. I wasn't thinking that at all. We've had quite a lot of good...
That's fine. I mean, that's not a bad thing to be thinking about.
It's also interesting to note that a huge percentage of attendees have stayed to the end of the session, which we're approaching now, which is also very reassuring. It proves that you didn't bore anybody. And people have also said they're really looking forward to seeing the recording. So
okay. Again, well, one thing I'd like to do, I didn't say this at the beginning, but if anybody has made notes of this session, it'd be great if somebody had actually sketch noted it, but I think that's unlikely. If you have made notes, I'd be really wonderful if you would share them with us. So I'll type in my email address, and if you're happy to share, then that would be really great. Because I'm always, when I actually run a workshop, I'm always wandering around the room looking at people's notes. It's really interesting the way people note take and what they make notes about. So if you would, as a little bit of research, be happy to share your notes. If you're typing it into a device, then just email it to me or just scan it or take a picture of it or whatever.
Do you want to put in your Twitter handle as well? Because we've got one or two people talking on Twitter as well.
I put in my that's my email, and my Twitter is designed learning, no G. So I think if you're in the UK, listen to Steve Wright in the afternoon. It's designed learning, no G. The reason was Twitter wouldn't take the final G when I first created it. But I quite like it now. Good. Well, I'm pleased. I'm hopefully I've got people to think about some stuff that they haven't thought about before, and hopefully some of that stuff is worked its way into their long-term memory, and hopefully in the future you can maybe practice it in your own practice.
Thank you very much, John.
Great.
I'm about to close the recording, just to say that I will save the chat and save the video and circulate that. If you do not want your chat contributions to be circulated for whatever reason, then if you let me know, I'll delete that element out of the chat. But otherwise, I think just to say once again, thank you everybody for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Yes, thank you everybody, and please, if you're not a member of the eLN, please do join us.
Thanks, John. Goodbye, everybody.
Okay, bye everybody, take care.